So, what you learn from the other parents, and there are a lot of veteran parents, it's kind of like AA, right? Like these parents have been going, some people in our group have been there, for 10 and 12 and more years, even though they're children or adults now. They really are there in a mentorship role. So, there is a wealth of knowledge in those support groups. And if you're feeling like your child, you don't know if they're just being a jerk or if they have mental health concerns, start going to some NAMI support groups and talk to the parents, learn the resources, the diagnostic resources and the treatment resources available. Bounce your ideas off them because, boy, you couldn't pay for knowledge like that
Yeah.
you'll get in a 2-hour meeting.
I have been talking more and more to the families that we work with when they adopt. No matter who their child is, coming to you through adoption is coming into the world with trauma, exposed trauma, that if you can get early child intervention in your community, if they'll give it to you, it's free. Take it, get it, because you don't know what your life is going to look like later. And it's always great to start that paperwork trail now and get as much knowledge and support. Never pass up support, especially if it's free. And
Absolutely.
many adoptive parents can get it. So get it. Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast, your go-to guide through the beautiful, complex, and transformative journey of adoption. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through adoption consultant for over a decade, author of the Adoption Roadmap book, and your trusted guide. In each episode, we dive into real experiences, expert insights, and the raw, honest truths that you will need to navigate your journey. Whether you're just beginning, in the thick of it, or well past placement, you'll find support and community here to help you navigate this unique path with confidence and love. Adoption isn't all rainbows and butterflies. It is life-changing and worth every bit of effort. Let's learn, grow, and journey together on the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. Today's episode is a deeply personal exploration of mental health and adoption. Our guest, who prefers to remain anonymous due to the sensitive nature of her journey, is both an adoptee and an adoptive mother. Today, we're diving into the complex intersection of mental health and adoption, a topic that challenges the notion that a loving, stable home is always enough. Our guest brings a unique perspective as both an adoptee and an adoptive mom, sharing her experiences navigating genetic predispositions, environmental triggers, and the very real impact of mental health challenges within her family. From witnessing her child's dramatic shift in behavior during high school to participating in courses and support groups with the National Alliance for Mental Health Illnesses, she offers honest insights on why early intervention and open conversations are critical. Join us as we explore how genetics, mental health, and adoption intertwine and what support systems can help families thrive despite these challenges. Welcome, my friend. I'm going to jump right into this conversation. You began learning about mental health diagnoses in your family long before discovering your own son's struggle, correct?
That is correct.
Awesome.
So
Yeah,
I
can you
was,
share a little bit about that?
yeah. So I was adopted as an infant, and within my adoptive family, who I call my mom and my dad, just for clarity, both of my parents struggled with mental health. Each had different diagnoses, and each had different impacts on me and my siblings as we grew up. My father was bipolar, manic
Mm-hmm.
depressive is what it was called then. And he committed suicide when I was 15. My mother, as an adult, um, was diagnosed with delusional disorder. And that really became apparent in my adolescence and teenage years and throughout the rest of my adult life. So, with both of my parents having really pretty severe mental illnesses, um, boy, I've kind of learned the hard way the impact of mental health on a family. As an adult, when we decided to grow our family through adoption, as we were filling out the forms about the demographics of a child we hope to adopt, race and gender and everything else, we were totally open. But when it came to mental health diagnoses, that was the box that we checked no on
Mm-hmm.
because I knew firsthand that love is not enough, right? You can't cure and you can't wish it away through um, through just loving them.
Yeah. So you said your father died when you were 15 through suicide.
Correct.
And had you already experienced your mother's mental health issues as well? And how did that manifest for you in raising you? Like, what did your life growing up look like?
In some ways, I had a really wonderful childhood with the opportunities for private school education and summer camp and um, a lot of stability. And my mom didn't work outside the home. So a lot of people would look at my life and say it was really idyllic. And when you're growing up in it, it's all you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I got older and started seeing my friends' families, and as I got to get some distance from my family, I didn't realize until later how disordered it was. They were both so deep in their own mental health struggles, there wasn't a lot left over for me. So, in some ways, I grew to be very, very independent at an early age, taking care of both of my parents, although I didn't understand what it was then. But it's called parentified when a child is parentified because of trauma or mental illness. You become your parents' caretaker in many ways. For me, that was always trying to smooth their path so it wouldn't trigger um, chaos within the family.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you become a people pleaser. Your radar is so finely tuned. Your radar for their mood, for what mental state they're in. So it really dominates every part of your life. My friends would always say, "Thank God you're adopted, and you don't have those genes," which the joke was on me because when I met my birth family as an adult, my birth mother has schizophrenia, as does my birth brother.
Wow. Do you have any siblings?
I have two siblings who are biological to my parents,
Hmm.
um, and one is affected and one is not. So one of my siblings did indeed inherit um, mental health issues.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot.
It is a
And
lot.
and thank you so much for being here and sharing your story, because I think you and I both know how important it is for hopeful adoptive parents to hear, and we'll get into that a little bit later, about genetics versus environment. But, you know, knowing that your biological mother and brother both had schizophrenia, you still chose to have a biological child. So, had you known that before you decided to have a biological child, and was having a bio child intentional on your part? What was your thought process there?
Yeah, I did not know. I did
Okay,
not find my biological family until our biological child was 4.
got it.
I um, learned when I was 16 I couldn't have children because an infection took away my fallopian tubes. So I always knew that we would either adopt, that I would adopt in the future, or that we would need medical interventions. So the fourth out of 5 in vitro fertilizations took, and we were blessed with a twin pregnancy, and we lost one of our sons at birth. Our son was a micro preemie and spent 6 weeks in the hospital. And after we brought him home, we were very involved with the birth to three program and
With the what program?
birth to three program.
Okay,
And that's early intervention from birth to three. And
okay,
it's, it's a national program, but it's free, thankfully. And it provides early interventions. So, his physical and developmental health was always on our radar because we were in the birth of three program. So they were able to pick up on um, delays that he was having. So we had very early neuropsych appointments along with occupational therapy and visual therapy and speech therapy and, kind of the whole gamut. So we had some insight very early on that he was having struggles, with things like executive functioning skills and ADD and anxiety. So yeah, so we had some ideas when he was very young. Thanks to those programs, a lot of people wouldn't know if they
mhm,
weren't really invested in those programs. But you're right, I did not know about my birth parents. And would I have tried so hard to have a biological child had I known? Um, to be honest, I probably wouldn't have because up until that time, my entire life had been consumed by caretaking people with severe mental illness. When I was 20, I was my mother's guardian for 2 years.
mm,
So, and I love our son. Um, I could not love him any more than I do, but it's not fair to him that I passed it on to him.
mm.
I would not have chosen that.
Yeah. Timing wise, how far apart are your boys?
Um, almost 3 years.
Okay, so you didn't yet know that your mom had schizophrenia.
I did not.
Did you first choose adoption for your second child, or did you try to get pregnant again? Because you didn't know at this point that your younger son, you didn't know the extent of
Our older
his.
son, we didn't
I'm
know.
sorry, of your
Yeah,
older son, correct?
right. No, after, losing, the
A
second
twin.
twin
Yeah.
and how difficult the pregnancy was, it just wasn't in the cards to try again. And
Hmm.
because I was adopted, for me, it was closing the circle, right,
Yeah.
to adopt. It was just always a part of my life, and, generally, it was a positive experience. So and my husband was completely on board, so we started the adoption process.
Hmm. Well, I love to hear that despite growing up with two parents with mental health issues and losing your father to suicide, that you're still saying it was a positive thing in your life.
And especially after meeting my birth mother and learning about the way that my birth brother was raised. She raised him. And they were homeless much of the time. He had an incredibly unstable childhood, kind of being passed from grandparent to grandparent. Um, I was really lucky. I can't imagine how my life would have turned out had she raised me.
Do you know if your biological grandparents had mental health issues?
I don't believe they did. I don't believe they did. But, it was kind of hard to get a lot of factual information
Hmm.
from my birth mom. So it's hard to say.
Well, and I ask because the whole generational thing is interesting. And, I've heard the idea of it skips a generation typically. And I don't know if that's just with schizophrenia or other mental health issues. And obviously, with any of this stuff, while you might, there's always exceptions, even if that is the case. And I don't know for sure that that is the case.
Yeah, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence about skipping generations.
Hmm.
But if you look at the research, the research doesn't show that. But
Okay.
from my involvement in NAMI support groups and other parents, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence for it. Um, but the risk factors are really for first degree relatives, and the more first degree relatives that have mental illnesses, really from ADD all the way to schizoaffective disorder, the risk factor is not just doubled; it's multiplied by the tenfold.
Wow. I want to back up for a second because I encourage everybody to get early intervention. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I don't want people to get scared away by executive functioning. Um, that's a huge um, characteristic of ADHD, which I
Yes,
know your son has,
yes,
which is definitely manageable. And it doesn't mean that if your child has executive functioning issues when they're young, that they're going to have severe mental health issues
absolutely,
growing up. So I just
hundred
wanted to,
percent, 100%. Yes, you were right about that.
okay. Now, you have firsthand experience with more mental health diagnoses than anyone should have experience with personally. Can we
I
just go
agree.
through those? And she's shaking her head, folks. Yes. Can you briefly describe some of these as the way that you experience them so we can tell our listeners like what these disorders are from firsthand experience? And I do want to say my guest today is not a mental health professional. She is not a therapist of any sort or licensed in this industry. She has firsthand personal experience, and that's all she's sharing today. So, that said, even though you've taken courses as well and done a lot of research as most parents would, if
Yeah,
they are experiencing this. Let's start with delusional disorder, which I think you said your mom had, right?
correct,
What
correct.
is that?
And delusional disorder is interesting because it can be later onset in life, especially in women. And delusional disorder, there's always a range, of course, but it is really persistent beliefs that are not based in reality. People with delusional disorder can often be quite functional outside of this set of beliefs, which is how my mom presented. And there's, different kinds like persecutorial. Um, there's even a somatic delusional disorder, which is kind of the far side of hypochondria. Um, so it's this persistent belief not grounded in reality. Interestingly, my mother's aunt also had delusional disorder. She was one of the earliest lobotomies performed in the United States.
And can you explain what that is for people who don't know?
A lobotomy?
Yeah,
Yeah, they don't do them anymore.
I know. And I didn't really know what that was either until I was listening to a podcast about mental health and the old time mental health hospitals that they have. But can you explain that because I was a little stunned.
Yeah, yeah. The earliest ones were actually done with an ice pick through the tear duct. It, right in here I'm pointing at the
Ugh.
center of my eye, right? And they go up into the brain and they kind of, rub it around a little bit and pull it out. And it was kind of day surgery. And because they learned that the frontal lobe in the brain really controls, a lot of that emotional regulation. And so the answer, way back then, and this was cutting edge science, literally cutting edge, was simply to remove that part of the brain, thinking that people would, be fine once they did that. And it was actually very common before psychotropic medications came along.
Wow.
And over time, it fell out of favor. But you think Rose Kennedy, and it was very common. So my mom's aunt um, had that. She had a lobotomy. She was never quite right again, but she was a lot of fun. And but my mom, and I cared for her, until her death, and never once, never once did she falter that um, the things that she thought were happening were not 100% true. And growing up, it was incredibly difficult. I actually once stole her diary and I went and copied it, like in the middle of the night. And I kept it with me because when she would talk to me about her beliefs, you believe your parents, right? Because everything that they say is true. They're your parents. And she would talk to me about these things, and I would have to open the diary because there in black and white, I could see how crazy it was.
Hmm.
And I still have it um, because in every other way, she was so functional.
So
So my,
does that mean like if I believed that the sky was purple,
yep,
and is it something that comes and goes and sometimes I know it's actually not
no,
purple, or so that's the delusion I carry with me, but
yes,
everything else I'm okay with, and that in that way I can function in the world. But I know the sky is purple.
right,
So if I shared that with somebody, they'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
right,
But if I
yeah.
didn't, they
And,
would
and
think
often,
nothing's wrong with her.
right, often the beliefs are, much more pervasive. my mom used to think that the CIA was sending planes overhead to record all of her phone calls, and she wouldn't allow us to talk on the phone
Okay.
because of that.
She
She,
might not be wrong. I
yeah,
mean, with Alexa now and
right,
our iPhones, she might not have been wrong.
right. But her
Yeah.
delusions really affected, all of our lives.
Hmm.
But she believed them 100%.
Yeah.
For my father, I was young. I was 15. But he was often deeply, deeply depressed. Um, and when he died, he owned 11 boats. So, there was the mania. He had 6 cars and 11 boats. So, that was the right, both sides of the bipolar.
Yeah. So
Bipolar.
explain bipolar a little bit more. Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's cycles of mania and cycles of depression.
Hmm.
And the depression is, the deepest, darkest place that you've ever been to. And the cycles of mania, often include spending money or, what other people would think is just over the top behavior. For some people, it's sexually acting out or gambling or working 24 hours a day with no rest. The mania, people say, is kind of this great feeling, right? You're invincible, you're on top of it. And then comes the crash. And for some people, those waves are pretty short and sharp. And for other people, it's more like waves in the ocean. And the more severe the disease is, those peaks and valleys are much higher and much closer together. For the last few years of my father's life, he was really in the, more of a depressive state. And of course, medicating with alcohol.
Yeah.
Um,
I was going to ask you. So first of all, bipolar is also considered manic depressive
yeah, right,
disorder,
right,
which in those terms are still used interchangeably.
correct,
By the way, and I say that because when you're reading a situation, when you're a hopeful adoptive parent and you're reading an adoption situation and you read manic depression, that doesn't somehow sound as bad as bipolar disorder.
right.
And it's another thing I just learned because one of my clients actually said, no, Becca, it's bipolar. And I was like, it is? Um, eh, how did you know your parents had these mental health disorders? Did they tell you? And also, were they on medication?
They were not on medication.
Okay.
Um, for my father, just prior to his death, he was waiting for a bed in an inpatient facility. I didn't understand it then. I didn't know. Um, I didn't know. But he was waiting for a bed in an inpatient facility. And in the early 80s, for a man, it takes quite a lot to get to that point for them to accept inpatient care. And he killed himself before he went. For my mother, I had been seeing a therapist. I didn't understand. When I was 20, she attempted suicide. And I found her and became her guardian and took care of her. And it was through the help of my therapist and the therapist that my mother was court ordered to see for a while, um, that helped me understand what she was struggling with. She never accepted it and she never took medication. And, she lived another 40 years. And outside of this one area of her life that did cause her a lot of trauma, um, she had a good life.
Yeah. I want to hug that little girl inside of you and say, I'm so sorry you have had to go through all of this growing up.
Yeah.
Um, ADHD.
Yes.
What is that, and how did that manifest for you with your biological son?
Yeah. And I also have ADD, not
Okay.
ADHD, but ADD.
I don't think they differentiate anymore.
They don't?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think they just call it distracted type. So
It's all part of the spectrum.
it's all part of the spectrum. As our son was going through the diagnostic process, I was reading the checklists and like, holy cow, that's me in a nutshell. That's me. And so I started medication for ADD, which I still take now. And I wish that people were diagnosing, kids in the 70s and 80s for ADD because I think my life would have turned out very differently had I had the benefit of medication when I was still in school, because that was the part where I really struggled. For our son, when he had his first neuropsych appointment, which for those that don't know what a neuropsychological exam is, it's not just meeting with a psychiatrist. It's really almost a 2-day set of tests for, it can be for any age. And he's had 3 of them, where they really kind of drill down really to see at a very neurological level what's going on. And when the psychiatrist gave us the report, he said, you can expect about 20 minutes of focused attention from him. And I said, oh, like an hour or 20 minutes an hour, from like, and he's like, no, like a day.
Oh,
That's, and I'm going to cry again. He said, you need to know this isn't a moral failing.
that this is
He's
what?
not a moral failing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not trying to do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is what he's capable of,
Yeah.
which was really a gift to learn um, when he was so young that, that was, a 10 out of 10 on the scale, that's what we were dealing with, and a lot of anxiety. And we did try medication when he was young, and unfortunately, he had Tourette's. Um, the medication induced Tourette syndrome, which was pretty debilitating. So we had to stop medication for ADD.
And you couldn't try another medication?
Well, we went through a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's extremely common. Um, my son also has ADHD, and the executive functioning is a big thing there.
It's,
And that means, because I didn't know what that meant for a long time, um, kind of being able to organize yourself um, when this is the order of my day type of thing, and I know when at this time I go here, and this is what I'll need for that, and at this time I go here, and this is what I'll need for that. It's hard for them to remember without constant reminders of, okay, now you go here and this is what you need, so where do you have to go get it from? Now put this down and go get that, like.
mm-hmm.
And when you, like, for me, I don't have that issue. um I've got plenty of others. But that issue I don't have. And it's really difficult, just like you said, it was a gift to learn that that's all he was capable of. Because if you don't understand that, it is so frustrating.
It is maddening.
Like,
Yes.
Why can't you concentrate for more than 3 minutes on your homework? This is the easiest problem in the world. Why aren't you getting it?
Right.
As a neurotypical person, I was pulling my hair out. And then when I found out he's just not capable of that without XYZ to help him do that,
Right.
it doesn't make it much easier to handle, but you can think about it differently and you can have a little bit more compassion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, there are really ways to, help a child with ADD or even an
Yes.
adult with ADD, right? Because it's all about that dopamine response. So, how can you create games and challenges to elicit that dopamine response? That's why they're
Mhm.
often drawn to video games, right? Because it's that dopamine response. So, if you can build those into the tasks that they need to complete, um, that's really helpful. So,
Yeah.
learning all of that. But I always say, as an adult, ADD is like my superpower. I wouldn't change
Yeah.
it, right? My ability to hyper focus on tasks, my
Yes.
ability to multitask, the creativity. Um,
Mhm.
I wouldn't change it. I just wish I had medication when I was back in school.
Yeah. And it's really those school age years that it affects somebody the most until you understand what your superpowers are
That's right.
and what you can do to help you throughout your day so that you can manifest your superpowers. And so
Absolutely.
it is very manageable. It's just something that you need to learn about as a parent, and there are tools to help. What early warning signs did you see in your son that indicated something deeper than ADHD or Tourette's, which I didn't realize you dealt with also, just to throw that in there? Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Hey there, Adoption Roadmap fam. Are you ready to take the next step on your journey to parenthood? If so, head over to our website and take our quiz. It's called, Are You Ready to Adopt? It's not just about testing your knowledge, it's about making sure you're emotionally and practically prepared for the beautiful, complex journey of adoption. Let's make your dream of parenthood a reality. Go to rgadoptionconsulting.com and take the Are You Ready to Adopt quiz today. That's rgadoptionconsulting.com. The quiz is free, and it will let you know where you are in the process and if you're ready to jump into your adoption journey. What early warning signs did you see in your son that indicated something deeper than ADHD or Tourette's, which I didn't realize you dealt with also, just to throw that in there?
Right. And
But
that thankfully resolved.
yeah, thankfully. But when did you first notice something, and yeah, what did you observe?
You know, when he was in high school, um, he, kind of fell into, let's say, like a low achieving friend group. And they were, smoking pot. And so we, forced him to, meet with a therapist.
But
Right.
isn't that typical teenage shit? Like
It
smoking
is
pot, you're choosing the wrong friends, you're an asshole.
100%. 100%. Um, and I think that's, for these really more severe mental illnesses, they often really come on in late adolescence to early 20s, which is also the time period that kids are just jerks and they're right making friends with the wrong people and they're making bad choices. So it's often really hard to distinguish what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, the therapy therapist he was working with, um, and our son had, signed the form that the therapist could talk to us. And there started to be some things he would talk about that were really concerning. Um, it's called, magical thinking. Some behaviors that could be hallucinations, or it could be that he was reading the scene wrong. We just didn't know. You just don't know. And it wasn't until his senior year in high school that things really started to fall apart in a way. It's hard to believe that this isn't adolescent behavior, right? As a parent, you just don't want to believe it. But it started to become really clear. And he had an incident at the school, and I went and picked him up from school. I had to go find him. He was kind of wandering the halls with the hoodie over the head, and that was the last time he went back to school. Um, and it just kind of fell apart from there.
How is magical thinking different than delusions?
Um, so there's a period for schizophrenia called the prodromal period.
Prodromal?
Prodromal, and there's generally what's called the first incidence of psychosis. Um, and so for schizophrenia, it requires auditory and visual hallucinations. There's kind of a checklist of things.
Mm.
And the prodromal period is where schizophrenia has positive symptoms and negative symptoms. And that's not good and bad. Negative symptoms are deficits, things that are taken away, like blunting of emotion, blunting of affect, um, hygiene, sleep schedules. And then positive symptoms are ones that are added, like psychosis, hallucinations. Um, so in the prodromal period, there's usually a first incident of psychosis, and then you see these negative symptoms start to multiply. And a lot of that looks like teenage behavior. And the prodromal phase can be 6 months to 2 years. And that's when things are kind of murky. Um, and then the positive symptoms really come on, and it becomes very apparent that you're not dealing with teenage behavior. Um, One of the hallmarks of not only schizophrenia, but a lot of disorders is called anosognosia. Anosognosia, and they can brain map this, is not knowing that you have a mental illness. And it's not an unwillingness to believe. It's not that you cannot convince someone. There is nothing that you can say or do that would convince someone with anosognosia that they have a mental illness. And they've brain mapped it on MRIs. And there's a part of the brain, pointing at my brain, that does not light up in people with severe mental illness. And just like having that neuropsych appointment and learning that 20 minutes a day was about the attention span we could get, when I learned that, um, it's not that he doesn't believe me or that he's being a jerk. That part of the brain does not work in people with really profound mental illness. Only about 75% of the people with schizophrenia have anosognosia. And that's, you will never convince them. The other 25% do recognize that they have a brain disease, and they will take medication because they know, um, and they want a different life. But that is why most people with mental illnesses who have anosognosia will not take medication.
Wow. Is schizoaffective disorder the same as schizophrenia?
It is similar, but schizoaffective disorder is, in addition to schizophrenia, it is a mood disorder. So it is bipolar disorder and schizophrenia.
Oof.
So it is a double whammy. That's a very difficult diagnosis.
I see it a lot. No, I don't see it a lot. I see it sometimes in adoption situations, and I'm usually asked what that is, and thank you.
It's a double whammy, is what it is.
Oof. Wow. You had mentioned to me offline that there's evidence linking adolescent marijuana use to an earlier onset of psychosis.
Correct. Correct.
Talk to me about that, and do you believe that you experienced that? What can parents do if they, I don't know.
Right.
This is such a common thing for adolescents. I mean,
It's a really common thing. And I think there was always a lot of anecdotal evidence about it. And a lot of it is the chicken and the egg, right? If you're dealing with a mood disorder or feeling like you're seeing things or hearing things, or you're depressed or anxious, right? Kids smoke pot or they drink. So that's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? Is someone self medicating because they're having these issues, or did the marijuana bring it out? But now there are very clear and definitive long term studies that show, all other things being equal, that marijuana is indeed a trigger for someone who already has genetic predisposition to schizophrenia. And to a smaller extent, of course, psychedelics and cocaine. But when you look at kids, you know they're they're smoking pot at a younger age. They're usually not doing these hardcore drugs. So marijuana is really, um, and I don't have any judgment. I mean, people smoke pot. I don't, but people do, and I don't have any judgment about it.
yeah.
But um, raising teenagers, that is the one thing that I would, especially if you know that your child has a genetic predisposition, I would work as hard as I could to prevent them from smoking pot, especially habitually.
I listened to a podcast that I'm going to link because I think it's brilliant for anyone who's a parent. It's called Ask Lisa, the Psychology of Parenting, with Dr. Lisa Demore, who happens to be a Clevelander.
Mm,
She is brilliant, and she has an episode that talks about smoking pot and how marijuana, that as parents, and I grew up in the 80s. I certainly smoked pot when I was a teenager, and it was very prevalent. It was also very different back then than marijuana is now because you don't know what you're getting anymore,
absolutely.
right? So that's a huge factor right there. On the other hand, and they talked about this, like, do you want, I always thought, well, if my son's going to smoke, I'm just going to tell him to come to me and I'll go to a dispensary and get it. The the problem is, though, when you are an adolescent, it f's up your brain so much and you cannot change that.
Yes.
And until your brain is fully grown, which doesn't happen until much later.
Yeah, 24, 25.
Yeah, I think it's like 23 to 25. That it can have some really, really severe effects. So it's interesting to me that there are studies about psychosis, but even so, parents who think totally open to marijuana, there's no big deal. I smoked it too.
Right.
There's, you can get it legally now in most states. What's the big deal? But go listen to this episode. It is a big deal. And evidently, even more than what they talked about for any quote unquote, I was going to say normal, I'll say neurotypical person.
Right. Right.
Um, the other thing I can't help but think about is your son was a twin who lost his twin at birth.
Yes.
Do you think that this played a role in his getting schizophrenia, or I don't know? Is there any link there?
I've always wondered about that. I think there's, I would imagine that that was a traumatic experience, just at the very elemental level,
Mm-hmm.
right? To be separated from, this like little body, right? That you were, housed with for for 7.5 months because I delivered early, right? That was a traumatic situation. Also, being in the hospital for 6 weeks, and although I was there as many hours a day as I could be, um, that's a traumatic place to be. Just
Mm-hmm.
try sitting in a NICU for 12 hours and imagine it for 24 hours, right? With the beeping and the beeping and the doctors. And I think those early experiences must have been difficult ones.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know.
fascinating. How do you see the role of early intervention and counseling in mitigating mental health challenges?
Oh, I think it's huge, um, for a lot of reasons. I don't know that our son's path would have been any different.
Hmm.
Um, we did have early interventions, because he was a micropreemie, um, which led us to the neuropsych appointments and being connected with a lot of really amazing professionals. So we were really kind of deeply in the therapeutic community anyway.
Hmm.
Um, I was able to parent from a very different place, um, knowing what I knew. Um, so yeah, I think it's hugely important to be connected in that. More recently, I've been really connected with the NAMI community and the NAMI support groups, um, and that's been pretty huge as well.
How did your experiences with NAMI, which is the National Association for Mental Illnesses,
Hmm. That's
how
right.
did that? Um, I know you took a course with them and you did groups. How did that influence your approach within your family?
Yeah, we did a 2-month course, with them, and that was great for my husband and I to really be on the same page, because
Mm,
I've always been the one who's you know caretaking and working with all the mental health professionals.
mm-hmm.
So that really brought both of us together on the same page, um, and a really good understanding of not only the mental health concerns, but what's available in the community and treatment paths, and getting disability and working with doctors. And that was a fantastic class. And then they have biweekly support groups. And for anyone who has a child, um, or if they themselves or have mental health issues, working with a NAMI support group is absolutely invaluable, because the groups are local and a lot of them are in person and a lot of them are virtual. But that's where you really learn what resources are available in your community.
Mm.
The good resources, the bad resources, how to jump ahead on the wait list, how to navigate different hospital systems. So, what you learn from the other parents, and there are a lot of veteran parents, it's kind of like AA, right? Like these parents have been going, some people in our group have been there, for 10 and 12 and more years, even though they're children or adults now. They really are there in a mentorship role, so there is a wealth of knowledge um, in those support groups. And if you're feeling like your child, you don't know if they're just being a jerk or if they have mental health concerns, start going to some NAMI support groups and talk to the parents, learn the resources, um, the diagnostic resources and the treatment resources available. Bounce your ideas off them because boy, you couldn't pay for knowledge like that
Yeah.
you'll get in a 2-hour meeting.
I have been talking more and more to the families that we work with when they adopt. No matter who their child is, coming to you through adoption is coming into the world with trauma, exposed trauma, that if you can get early child intervention in your community, if they'll give it to you, it's free. Take it, get it, because you don't know what your life is going to look like later. And it's always great to start that paperwork trail now and get as much knowledge and support. Never pass up support, especially if it's free. And
Absolutely.
many adoptive parents can get it. So get it.
Yeah. 100% agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What key piece of advice would you offer to adoptive parents who are faced with considering an adoption situation where the expectant mother has been diagnosed with mental health issues and they're trying to figure out, should we present, should we not present?
This is the question that I think triggered this podcast because you
Yeah.
and I were talking in person about this. And um, I see that question asked online a lot in the adoption support groups. Should I present? And I'll see, a whole slew of comments saying, as long as you raise a child in a good home, that's not going to be an issue. Like genetics isn't everything, just love on them, raise them in the faith and send them to good schools and everything's going to be fine. And um, it's not true. Genetics plays a huge role. And, that it's said that there needs to be a genetic component and then there's a trigger component. And you can't control life because that trigger can be something as simple as the child being bullied or a car accident or the death of a grandparent. That triggering factor could be anything.
Could be smoking marijuana.
Could be smoking marijuana. And if you think that you can take a child with, a genetic predisposition and you just raise them right and it won't happen, that's not true. And that's not to say every child that has that genetic predisposition will manifest a mental illness. I had the genetic predisposition by twofold, right? By two first degree relatives. And I'm I'm fine, but my son isn't. Um, Not everyone can handle raising a child. Not everyone will have the resources in their community. Not everyone will have the time to raise a child with a mental health disability. And that's not saying that if you have the genes, you're going to get it. That's not what I'm saying. But you have to be prepared for that possibility and really think about your ability to make a lifelong commitment to caring for that child. Whether you have the family support, whether you have the community resources to do it.
Yeah. I'm sitting here kind of going through scenarios while you're talking to, and I'm thinking, you could be lucky,
Yeah,
right? And it won't manifest.
absolutely.
And maybe it's not luck. Maybe it's a matter of you don't know enough about the history of the family and how far back it goes and how many first degree relatives. And, maybe if you knew that, it would be a better risk or a riskier risk. There's just so many unknowns. And there are people out there that understand that and feel like they can do it or have family members in their life that have certain disorders. So they have seen it, they have lived it, they know how to manage it. And that's amazing.
Yeah, yep.
But don't go into it naive
Don't go
thinking
into it naive. And I
if
will
we
say our
give.
son's doing great. He's living independently. He's working. He has a strong support system. I see him every day,
Yeah.
and who knows what the future's hold.
And I
I love
also
him with.
know that he hasn't always been doing great.
He hasn't always. He hasn't always been doing great, and it's been hard for him and for us. But um, and who knows
No,
what the future holds. But for right now, he's in a great place.
that's awesome. Glad to hear that. You also have another son through adoption
Yes,
who is doing amazing.
it's
How did you
doing amazing.
balance your household raising a child with severe mental health challenges alongside a neurotypical adoptive child?
It's really hard.
I mean, there's a lot of issues right there within, because you can't, a child through adoption needs a lot of it. I mean, any child needs a lot of attention, right? And everybody has its own nuances.
Yeah,
There's a lot of nuances right there. Transracial,
yeah,
adoptive,
yeah,
ADHD, schizophrenia, yeah.
yeah. It was a lot, and I'm really fortunate that I was able to work from home in my job and um, be home with them. But those were some really exhausting years. I will say it was hard, and also so filled with joy and energy and creativity, and um, it was a lot. But those were great years. Little kids,
Mm.
little problems; big kids, big problems. I wouldn't trade it, and I think they had some pretty magical childhoods.
Do
I
they
like to
have,
think that anyway.
yeah. Do they have a good relationship?
They're very different. Their
Hmm.
interests are very different, but they do. They have a good relationship. There's um, nothing negative between them. They're just, different people and different interests.
Yeah. Is it possible, do you know, to conduct DNA testing or any other assessments when a baby is young or
Um,
during pregnancy to identify any underlying genetic risks for mental health issues?
there are no um, DNA tests that can currently predict um, mental health issues. They are identifying genes which they believe or they know are part of the complex picture, but they don't have any current tests, to test for those genes because it's not as simple as, a single gene, right? It's kind of this cluster of genetic factors. And
Mm.
so there isn't. There is a test called GenSight that um, if you or your loved one needs to take medication for mental illness or even depression, anxiety, ADD, or psychotropic medication. GenSight is a really fabulous genetic test that will tell you how you will react to each of the different drugs.
Wow.
Like, will they do well on medication A, B, C, or D? And that's, because all of those medications kind of treat the illness a little bit differently, right? They
Yes.
focus on different things. So, GenSight is a great um, test. It's
So
not
if you knew about GenSight earlier when your son was first on ADHD medicine, would you have known that he would have gotten Tourette's?
probably, I mean,
That's so
probably would have,
yeah.
and it wasn't available then,
Yeah.
but we have done it more recently. I'm just going to throw out it's been available maybe 5 to 7 years. I could be wrong. Um, so, but that's a really useful one. I think for anyone to know.
Yeah.
Instead of cycling through a bunch of antidepressants or antipsychotics or whatever it is you're taking, you can really pinpoint what's likely to work best and what's likely to work worst. It gives you like a green, red, or yellow, green, red, or yellow ranking for all the medications.
And is it based on your blood type?
No, it's like a DNA test.
Oh, yeah, okay. A
Yeah,
DNA test. That's fascinating.
yeah, yeah. So that's super helpful.
Thank you
No,
so
DNA.
much
Oh, you are welcome.
for opening up, being vulnerable, sharing your story. This information is so important for people. Um, we
And I,
are,
and I think a lot of people just don't have the personal lived experience to
mm,
really understand the impact of it.
to really understand what?
The impact of it.
The impact. Yeah. Yeah. And we are, as hopeful adoptive parents, so many of us feel this feeling of desperation to become a parent.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's so hard to pass up a situation,
Yes.
especially when, I was just looking at a situation the other day, and schizoaffective was part of the diagnosis, and there was a picture of mom, and she's a beautiful girl. And it's so hard to look at a picture and see one thing and then read something that might contradict what you think just because of looks.
Yeah.
And it just tugs at your heartstrings, and you think, well, I'll just take a chance.
Right.
But I want you to ask yourself before you present, is it worth that risk? Is it worth that chance?
And are you able
Mm-hmm.
to commit fully to parenting a child who may or may not have lifelong mental health issues?
Yeah.
And some people are, and that's amazing because those children need the best of homes
Mm-hmm.
and committed parents.
And even with the most severe of mental healths, we all have our superpowers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Before we sign off and I say goodbye, I have a quick rapid fire questions to ask you.
Based on where I am in my parenting journey, I would say NAMI is the one organization that has really provided not only professional support, but peer support and has really made me a better advocate and a better parent for our child.
What's one piece of advice you would like to share with adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents?
Boy, that's a great question. When we adopted our son, it was a closed adoption. And I always said watching him grow was like watching a flower bud start to open, and you just didn't know what that flower was going to look like at the end. And so celebrate each phase of that bud pulling open and look for all of that beauty that it holds, because that's really what it was like for us.
What's one thing you wish every adoptive parent knew before they brought their child home?
Keep your child's story private, especially the difficult parts of their story, because it will color other people's impression of your child. You want them to be that rose that's unfolding and you don't know what it's going to look like. You don't want people to look at that rose and say, oh, well, I know what's coming for them because I heard this, that, or the other.
Yes. Describe adoption in 3 words.
I would say it is love, love, love. The first love is from the birth parent, because that decision is rooted in love. And from then the adoptive parent to the child, I think that is one of the purest loves. Um, a love that's not based on biological connection. And thirdly, the third love is the shared love that your child has for you and their biological family, and honoring both pieces of that.
That is so beautiful. Adoption is not just a destination, it's a journey filled with love, resilience, and growth. Wherever you are on this roadmap, trust in your path, stay open to learning, and always lead with your heart. You already have everything you need to create a beautiful story for your family. And when the road takes unexpected detours, I'm here to help you navigate every turn along the adoption roadmap. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing such important information with our listeners. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.